Chapter 4 Hero, Tales 39. The sun tests his son-in-law, Bella Coola. Boas, Jessup North Pacific Expedition. In a place on Bella Coola River, there used to be a salmon weir. A chief and his wife lived at this place. One day the wife was cutting salmon on the bank of the river. When she opened the last salmon, she found a small boy in it. She took him out and washed him in the river. She placed him nearby, entered the house, and said to the people, "Come and see what I have found in my salmon." She had a child in her house, which was still in the cradle. The little boy whom she had found was half as long as her forearm. She carried him into the house, and the people advised her to take good care of him. She nursed him with her own baby. When the people were talking in the house, the baby looked around as though he understood what they were saying. On the following day, the people were surprised to see how much he had grown, and in a few days, he was as tall as any ordinary child. Her own baby also grew up with marvelous rapidity. She gave each of them one breast. After a few days, they were able to walk and to talk. When they mature, the boys go on adventures. The two young men were passing by the houses and looked into the doorways. There was a house in the center of this town. There they saw a beautiful girl sitting in the middle of the house. Her hair was red and reached down to the fore. She was very white. Her eyes were large and as clear as rock crystal. The boy fell in love with the girl. They went on, but his thoughts were with her. The salmon boy said, "I am going to enter this house. You must watch closely what I do and imitate me." The door of this house tries to bite everyone who enters. The door opened, and the salmon jumped into the house. Then the door snapped, but missed him. When it opened again, the boy jumped into the house. They found a number of people inside who invited them to sit down. They spread food before them, but the boy did not like their food. It had a very strong smell and looked rather curious. It consisted of algae that grow on logs that lie in the river. When the boy did not touch it, one of the men said to him, "Maybe you want to eat those two children. Take them down to the river and throw them into the water, but do not look." The two children arose, and he took them down to the river. Then he threw them into the water without looking at them. At the place where he had thrown them down, he found a male and a female salmon. He took them up to the house and roasted them. The people told him to preserve the intestines and the bones carefully. After he had eaten, one of the men told him to carry the intestines and the bones to the same place where he had thrown the children into the water. He carried them in his hands and threw them into the river without looking. When he entered the house, he heard the children following him. The girl was covering one of her eyes with her hands. The boy was limping because he had lost one of his bones. Then the people looked at the place where the boy had been sitting, and they found the eye and a bone from the head of the male salmon. They ordered the boy to throw these into the water. He took the children and the eye and the bone and threw them into the river. Then the children were hale and well. After a while, the youth said to his salmon brother, "I wish to go to the other house where I saw the beautiful girl." They went there, and he said to his salmon brother, "Let us enter. I should like to see her face well." They went in. Then the man arose and spread a caribou blanket for them to sit on, and the people gave them food. Then he whispered to his brother, "Tell the girl I want to marry her." The salmon boy told the girl, who smiled, and said, "He must not marry me. Whoever marries me must die. I like him, and I do not wish to kill him. But if he wishes to die, let him marry me." The woman was the salmonberry bird. After one day, she gave birth to a boy, and on the following day, she gave birth to a girl. She was the daughter of the spring salmon. After a while, the girl's father said, "Let us launch our canoe, and let us carry the young man back to his own people." He sent a messenger to call all the people of the village, and they all made themselves ready. And early the next morning, they started in their canoes. The young man went in the canoe of the spring salmon, which was the fastest. The canoe of the sockeye salmon came next. The people in the canoe of the calico salmon were laughing all the time. They went up the river, and a short distance below the village of the young man's father they landed, and made fast their canoes. Then they sent two messengers up the river to see if the people had finished their salmon weir. Soon they returned with information that the weir had been finished. Then they sent the young man and his wife, and they gave them a great many presents for the young man's father. The watchman who was stationed at the salmon weir saw 2 beautiful salmon entering the trap. They were actually the canoes of the salmon, but they looked to him like 2 salmon. Then the watchman put the traps down over the weir, and he saw a great many FSH entering them. He raised the trap when it was full and took the FSH out. The young man thought, "I wish you would treat me and my wife carefully," and his wish came true. The man broke the heads of the other salmon, but he saved the young man and his wife. Then he carried the FSH up to the house and hung them over a pole. During the night, the young man and his wife resumed their human shape. The youth entered his father's house. His head was covered with eagle down. He said to his father, "I am the FSH whom you caught yesterday. Do you remember the time when you lost me? I have lived in the country of the salmon. The salmon accompanied me here. They're staying a little farther down the river. It pleases the salmon to see the people eating FSH." And, turning to his mother, he continued, "You must be careful when cutting salmon. Never break any of their bones, but preserve them and throw them into the water." The 2 children of the young man had also entered into the salmon trap. He put some leaves on the ground, placed red and white cedar bark over them, and covered them with eagle down, and he told his mother to place the salmon upon these. As soon as he had given these instructions, the salmon began to come up the river. They crossed the weir and entered the traps. They went up the river as far as Stith, and the people dried the salmon according to his instructions. They threw the bones into the water, and the salmon returned to life and went back to their own country, leaving their meat behind. The Cohoes salmon had the slowest canoe, and therefore he was the last to reach the villages. He gave many presents to the Indians. He gave them many colored leaves, and thus caused the leaves of the trees to change color in the autumn. Now all the salmon had returned. The salmonberry bird and her children had returned with them. Then the young man made up his mind to build a small hut, from which he intended to catch eagles. He used a long pole, to which a noose was attached. The eagles were baited by means of salmon. He spread a mat in his little house, and when he had caught an eagle, he pulled out its down. He accumulated a vast amount of down. Then he went back to his house and asked his younger brother to accompany him. When they came to the hut which he had used for catching eagles, he gave the boy a small staff. Then he said to him, "Do not be sorry when I leave you. I'm going to visit the sun. I'm not going to stay away a long time. I stayed long in the country of the salmon, but I shall not stay long in heaven. I'm going to lie down on this mat. Cover me with this down, and then begin to beat time with your staff. You will see a large feather flying upward, then stop." The boy obeyed, and everything happened as he had said. The boy saw the feather flying in wide circles. When it reached a great height, it began to soar in large circles, and finally disappeared in the sky. Then the boy cried and went back to his mother. The young man who had ascended to heaven found there a large house. It was the house of myths. There he resumed his human shape and peeped in at the door. Inside he saw a number of people who were turning their faces toward the wall. They were sitting on a low platform in the rear of the house. In the right-hand corner of the house, he saw a large FRE and women sitting around it. He leaned forward and looked into the house. An old woman discovered him and beckoned him to come to her. He stepped up to her, and she warned him by signs not to go to the rear of the house. She said, "Be careful. The men in the rear of the house intend to harm you." She opened a small box and gave him the bladder of a mountain goat, which contained a cold wind. She told him to open the bladder if they should attempt to harm him. She said that if he opened it, no FRE could burn him. She told him that the men were going to place him near the FRE in order to burn him, that one of them would wipe his face. Then FRE would come forth from the fore, scorching everything. The old woman told him everything that the people were going to do. Now the man in the rear of the house turned round. He was the sun himself. He was going to try the strength of the visitor. When he saw the young man, he said to the old woman, "Did anybody come to visit you? Let the young man come up to me. I wish him to sit down near me." The young man stepped up to the sun And as soon as he had sat down, the son wiped his face and looked at the young man. He had turned his face while he was wiping it. Then the young man felt very hot. He tied his blanket tightly round his body and opened the bladder which the woman had given him. Then the cold wind that blows down the mountains in the winter was liberated, and he felt cool and comfortable. The sun had not been able to do him any harm. The old man did not say anything, but looked at his visitor. After a while he said, "I wish to show you a little underground house that stands behind this house." They both rose and went outside. The small house had no door. Access was had to it by an opening in the center of the roof, through which a ladder led down to the floor. Not a breath of air entered this house. It was made of stone. When they had entered, the son made a small FRE in the middle of the house. Then he climbed up the ladder and closed the door, leaving his visitor inside. The son pulled up the ladder in order to make escape impossible. Then the house began to grow very hot. When the boy felt that he could not stand the heat any longer, he opened the bladder and the cold wind came out. Snow began to fall on the FRE, which was extinguished. Icicles began to form on the roof, and it was cool and comfortable inside. After a while the son said to his 4 daughters, "Go to the little underground house that stands behind our house and sweep it," meaning that they were to remove the remains of the young man whom he believed to be burned. They obeyed at once, each being eager to be the FRSD to enter. When they opened the house, they were much surprised to find icicles hanging down from the roof. When they were climbing down the ladder, the youth arose and scratched them. The youngest girl was the last to step down. The girls cried when the youth touched them and ran away. The son heard their screams and asked the reason. He was much surprised and annoyed to hear that the young man was still alive. Then he devised another way of killing his visitor. He told his daughters to call him into his house. They went, and the young man re-entered the house of myths. In the evening he lay down to sleep. Then the son said to his daughters, "Early tomorrow morning, climb the mountain behind our house. I shall tell the boy to follow you." The girls started while the visitor was still asleep. The girls climbed up to a small meadow which was near a precipice. They had taken the form of mountain goats. When the son saw his daughters on the meadow, he called to his visitor, saying, "See those mountain goats?" The young man arose when he saw the mountain goats. He wished to kill them. The son advised him to walk up the right-hand side of the mountain, saying that the left-hand side was dangerous. The young man carried his bow and arrow. The son said, "Do not use your own arrows. Mine are much better." Then they exchanged arrows, the son giving him 4 arrows of his own. The points of these arrows were made of coal. Now the young man began to climb the mountain. When he came up to the goats, he took one of the arrows, aimed it, and shot. It struck the animals, but fell down without killing it. The same happened with the other arrows. When he had spent all his arrows, they rushed up to him from the 4 sides, intending to kill him. His only way of escape was in the direction of the precipice. They rushed up to him and pushed him down the steep mountain. He fell headlong, but when he was halfway down, he transformed himself into a ball of bird's down. He alighted gently on a place covered with many stones. There he resumed the shape of a man, arose, and ran into the house of the son to get his own arrows. He took them, climbed the mountain again, and found the mountain goats on the same meadow. He shot them and killed them, and threw them down the precipice. Then he returned. He found the goats at the foot of the precipice and cut off their feet. He took them home. He found the son sitting in front of the house. He offered him the feet, saying, "Count them, and see how many I have killed." The son counted them, and now he knew that all his children were dead. Then he cried, "You killed my children!" Then the youth took the bodies of the goats, fed the feet on, and threw the bodies into a little river that was running past the place where they had fallen down. Thus they were restored to life. He had learned this art in the country of the salmon. Then he said to the girls, "Now run to see your father. He is wailing for you." They gave him a new name, saying, "He has restored us to life." The boy followed them. Then the son said, when he entered, "You shall marry my 2 eldest daughters." On the next morning the people arose. Then the son said to them, What shall I do to my son-in-law? He called him and said, Let us raise the trap of my salmon weir. They went up to the river in the son's canoe. The water of the river was boiling. The youth was in the bow of the canoe, while the son was steering. He caused the canoe to rock, intending to throw the young man into the water. The water formed a small cascade, running down over the weir. He told the young man to walk over the top of the weir in order to reach the trap. He did so, walking over the top beam of the weir. When he reached the baskets, the beam fell over, and he himself fell into the water. The son saw him rise twice in the whirlpool just below the weir. When he did not see him rise again, he turned his canoe and thought, Now the boy has certainly gone too. XXXIX. The son returned to his house and said to his daughters, I lost my son-in-law in the river. I was not able to defend him. Then his daughters were very sad. When the boy disappeared in the water, he was carried to XXXIX, and he resumed the shape of a salmon while in the water. And as soon as he landed, he resumed human shape and returned to his wife. The son saw him coming and was much surprised. In the evening, they went to sleep. On the following morning, the son thought, How can I kill my son-in-law? After a while, he said to him, Arise. We will go and split wood for fuel. He took his tools. They launched their canoe and went down the river to the sea. When they reached there, it was perfectly calm. There were many snags embedded in the mud in the mouth of the river, some of which were only half submerged. They selected one of these snags a long distance from the shore and began to split it. Then the son intentionally dropped his hammer into the water and thought at the same time, Do not fall straight down, but fall sideways, so that he will have much difficulty in finding you. Then he sat down in his canoe and said, Oh, I lost my old hammer. I had it at the time when the sun was created. He looked down into the water and did not say a word. After a while he said to the young man, Do you know how to dive? Can you get my hammer? The water is not very deep here. The young man did not reply. Then the son continued, I will not go back without my hammer. Then the boy said, I know how to dive. If you so wish, I will try to get it. The son promised to give him supernatural power if he was able to bring the hammer back. The youth jumped into the water, and then the son ordered the sea to rise, and he called the cold wind to make the water freeze. It grew so cold that a sheet of ice a fathom thick was formed at once on top of the sea. Now, he thought, I certainly have killed you. He left his canoe frozen up in the ice and went home. He said to his daughters, I have lost my son-in-law. He drifted away when the cold winds began to blow down the mountains. I have also lost my little hammer. But when he mentioned his hammer, his daughters knew at once what had happened. The young man found the hammer, and after he had obtained it, he was going to return to the canoe, but he struck his head against the ice and was unable to get out. He tried everywhere to find a crack. Finally, he found a very narrow one. He transformed himself into a FSH and came out of the crack. He jumped about on the ice in the form of a FSH and finally resumed his own shape. He went back to the son's house, carrying the hammer. The son was sitting in front of the FRE, his knees drawn up and his legs apart. His eyes were closed, and he was warming himself. The young man took his hammer and threw it right against his stomach, saying, Now take better care of your treasures. The young man scolded the son, saying, Now stop trying to kill me. If you try again, I shall kill you. Do you think I am an ordinary man? You cannot conquer me. The son did not reply. In the evening he said to his son-in-law, I hear a bird singing, which I should like very much to have. The young man asked, What bird is it? The son replied, I do not know it. Watch it early tomorrow morning. The young man resolved to catch the bird. Very early in the morning he arose. Then he heard the bird singing outside. He knew at once that it was the ptarmigan. He left the house and thought, I wish you would come down. Then the bird came down, and when it was quite nearby, he shot it. He hit one of its wings, intending to catch it alive. He waited for the sun to arise. The bird understood what the young man said, who thus spoke. The chief here wishes to see you. Do not be afraid, I am not going to kill you. The chief has often tried to kill me, but he has been unable to do so. You do not need to be afraid. The young man continued, "When it is dark, I shall tell the sun to ask you to sit near him. And when he is asleep, I want you to peck out his eyes." When the sun arose, the youth went into the house carrying the bird, saying, "I have caught the bird. Now I hope you will treat it kindly. It will awaken us when it is time to arise. When you lie down, let it sit down near you. Then it will call you in the morning." In the evening, the sun asked the bird to sit down next to his face. When he was asleep, the bird pecked out his eyes without his knowing it. Early in the morning, he heard the bird singing. He was going to open his eyes, but he was not able to do so. Then he called his son, saying, "The bird has blinded me." The young man jumped up and went to his father-in-law and said, "Why did you wish for the bird? Do you think it is good? It is a bad bird. It has pecked out your eyes." He took the bird and carried it outside and thanked it for having done as it was bidden. Then the bird flew away. When it was time for the son to start on his daily course, he said, "I am afraid I might fall because I cannot see my way." For 4 days he stayed in his house. He did not eat. He was very sad. Then his son-in-law made up his mind to cure him. He did not do so before because he wanted to punish him for his badness. He took some water and said to his father-in-law, "I will try to restore your eyesight." He threw the water upon his eyes, and at once his eyes were healed and well. He said, "Now you can see what power I have. The water with which I have washed my face has the power to heal diseases. While I was in the country of the salmon, I bathed in the water in which the old salmon bathed, in order to regain youth. Therefore the water in which I wash makes everything young and well." From this time on, the son did not try to do any harm to the young man. Finally, he wished to return to his father's village. He left the house and jumped down through the hole in heaven. His wife saw him being transformed into a ball of eagle down, which floated down gently. Then her father told her to climb as quickly as she could down his eyelashes. She did so and reached the ground at the same time as her husband. He met his younger brother, who did not recognize him. He had been in heaven for 1 year. XL, the jealous uncle Kodiak, Golder, Journal of American Folklore 16. In a village lived a man, known to his neighbors as Unnatural Uncle. When his nephews became a few years old, he would kill them. 2 had already suffered death at his hands. After the second had disappeared, his wife went to the mother of the boys and said, "Should another boy be born to you, let us conceal the fact from my husband and make him believe the child a girl. In that case he will not harm him, and we may succeed in bringing him up." Not long after the above conversation, another nephew was born. Unnatural Uncle, hearing that a child was born, sent his wife to ascertain the sex of the child. She, as had been agreed upon, reported the child a girl. "Let her live," he said. The 2 women tended and dressed the boy as if he were a girl. When he grew older, they told him to play with the girls and impressed upon him that he should at all times imitate the ways, attitudes, and postures of the girls, especially when attending to the calls of nature. Unnatural Uncle watched the boy as he was growing up and often wondered at his boyish looks. One day the boy, not knowing that his uncle was about and observing him, raised up his parka and so exposed his body. "Ah," said Unnatural Uncle to his wife, on reaching home, "this is the way you have fooled me. But I know everything now. Go and tell my nephew I wish to see him." With tears in her eyes, the poor woman delivered the message to the nephew, told him of the disappearance of his brothers and of his probable fate. The father and mother of the boy wept bitterly, for they were certain he would never return. The boy himself, although frightened, assured his parents to the contrary and begged them not to worry, for he would come back safe and sound. "Did my brothers have any playthings?" he asked before going. He was shown to a box where their things were kept. In it he found a piece of a knife, some eagle down, and a sour cranberry. These he hid about his person and went to meet his uncle. The latter greeted him and said, "Nephew, let us go and fetch some wood." When they came to a large forest, the boy remarked, "Here is good wood. Let us take some of it and go back." "Oh no, there is better wood farther on," said the uncle. From the forest, they stepped into a bare plain. "Let us go back. There is no wood here," called the boy. But the uncle motioned to him to come on, telling him that they would soon FND better wood. A little later, they came to a big log. "Here is what I want," exclaimed the uncle, and began splitting it. "Here, nephew, jump in and get that wedge out," called the uncle to the boy as one of the wedges fell in. When the boy did so, the man knocked out the other wedges. The log closed in on the boy and held him fast. "Stay there," said unnatural uncle, and walked off. For some time the boy remained in this helpless condition, planning a means of escape. At last he thought of his sour cranberry, and, taking it in his hand, he rubbed with it the interior of the log from edge to edge. The sourness of the berry caused the log to open its mouth, thus freeing him. On his way back to the village, he gathered a bundle of wood, which he left at his uncle's door, announcing the fact to him. "Here, uncle, I have brought you the wood." The latter was both surprised and vexed at his failure, and determined more than ever to kill the boy. His wife, however, warned him, "You had better not harm the boy. You have killed his brothers, and if you hurt him, you will come to grief." "I will kill him too," he savagely replied. When the boy reached his father's home, he found them weeping and mourning. "Don't weep," he pleaded. "He cannot hurt me. No matter where he takes me, I will always come back." In the morning he was again summoned to appear at his uncle's. Before going, he entreated his parents not to feel uneasy, assuring them that no harm would befall him, and that he would be back. The uncle called the boy to go with him after some ducks and eggs. They passed several places abounding in ducks and eggs, and each time that the boy suggested, "Let us take these and go back," the uncle replied, "Oh no, there are better ducks and eggs farther on." At last they came to a steep bluff, and, looking down, saw a great many ducks and eggs. "Go down carefully, nephew, and gather those ducks and eggs. Be quick, and come back as soon as you can." The boy saw the trap at a glance, and prepared for it by taking the eagle down in each hand, between thumb and finger. As the boy took a step or two downward, the uncle gave him a push, causing him to lose his footing. "He will never come back alive from here," smiled the uncle to himself as he walked back. If he had remained a while longer and looked down before going, he would have seen the boy descending gently instead of falling. The eagle down kept him up in the air, and he lighted at his own pleasure safe and sound. After gathering all the ducks and eggs he wanted, he ascended by holding up the down, as before, and blowing under it. Up he went, and in a short time stood on the summit. It was night before he sighted his uncle's home. At the door he deposited the birds and eggs and shouted, "Here, uncle, are the ducks and eggs." "What? Back again?" exclaimed the man, very much mortified. His wife again pleaded with him to leave the boy in peace. "You will come to grief if you don't," she said. "No, he cannot hurt me," he replied angrily, and spent the remainder of the night thinking and planning. Although he assured them that he would return, the boy's parents did not have much faith in it, for he found them on his return weeping for him. This grieved him. "Why do you weep?" he said. "Didn't I say I would come back? He can take me to no place from which I cannot come back." In the evening of the third day the aunt appeared and said that her husband wished the boy. He told his parents not to be disturbed and promised to come back soon. This time the uncle invited him to go with him after clams. The clams were very large enough to enclose a man. It was ebb tide, and they found plenty of clams not far from the beach. The boy suggested that they take these and go back, but the uncle put him off with, "There are better clams farther out." They waded into the water, and then the man noticed an extraordinarily large clam. "Take him," he said, but when the boy bent over, the clam took him in. So confident was unnatural uncle of his success this time that he uttered not a word, but with a triumphant grin on his face and a wave of his hand, he walked away. The boy tried to force the valves apart, but not succeeding, he cut the ligament with his piece of a knife, compelling the clam to open up little by little until he was able to hop out. He gathered some clams and left them at his uncle's door as if nothing had happened. The man, on hearing the boy's voice outside, was almost beside himself with rage. His wife did not attempt to pacify him. "I will say nothing more," she said. "I have warned you, and if you persist in your ways, you will suffer. The next day, unnatural uncle was busy making a box. "What is it for?" asked his wife. "A plaything for our nephew," he replied. In the evening the boy was sent for. On leaving his parents he said, "Do not feel uneasy about my absence. This time I may be away a long time, but I will come back nevertheless." "Nephew, here is something to amuse you," said his uncle. "Get inside of it, so that I may see whether it fts you." It fed him. So did the lid the box, and the rope the lid. He felt himself borne along, and from the noise of the waves he knew it was to the sea. The box was lowered, and with a shove it was set adrift. It was stormy. The waves beat over the box, and several times he gave himself up as lost. How long he drifted he had no idea, but at last he heard the waves dashing against the beach, and his heart rejoiced. Louder and louder did the joyful peal sound. He gathered himself together for the sudden stop which soon came, only to feel himself afloat again the next moment. This experience he went through several times, before the box finally stopped and he realized he was on land once more. As he lay there, many thoughts passed through his mind. Where was he? Was anyone living there? Would he be saved? Or would the food tide set him adrift again? What were his people at home doing? These and many other thoughts passed through his brain when he was startled by hearing voices, which he recognized a little later as women's. This is what he heard. "I saw the box FRSD, said one. "No, I saw it FRSD, said the other. "I am sure I saw it before you," said the FRSD speaker again, "and therefore it is mine." "Well, you may have the box, but its contents shall belong to me," replied the other. They picked up the box and began to carry it, but finding it somewhat heavy and being anxious to know what it contained, they stopped to untie it. "If there are many things in there, I shall have some of them," said the FRSD speaker, who rued her bargain. The other one said nothing. Great was their surprise on beholding him. He was in turn surprised to see two such beautiful girls, the large village, the numerous people, and their peculiar appearance, for he was among the eagle people in Eagle Land. The full-grown people, like the full-grown eagles, had white faces and heads, while those of the young people, like those of young eagles, were dark. Eagle skins were hanging about all over the village, and it amused him to watch some of the people put on their eagle skins and change to eagles, and after flying around, take them off and become human beings again. The girls, being the daughters of the village chief, led the boy to their father, each claiming him. When he had heard them both, the chief gave the boy to the older girl, the second speaker. With her he lived happily, but his thoughts would very often wander back to his former home, the people there, his parents, and the thought of his uncle's cruelty to them would make his heart ache. His wife noted these spells of depression and questioned him about them until he told her of his parents and uncle. She, like a good wife, bade him cheer up and then went to have a talk with her father. He sent for his son-in-law and advised him to put on his chief's eagle skin, soar up high until he could see his village, fly over there, visit his parents, and bring them back with him. He did as he was told, and in a short time found himself in the village. Although he could see all other people, his parents were not in sight. This was in the evening. During the night, he went out to sea, brought back a large whale, and placed it on the beach, knowing that all the villagers would come out for the meat. The FRSD person to come to the village beach in the morning was unnatural uncle, and when he saw the whale, he aroused the village, and a little later all, except the boy's father and mother, were there cutting and storing up the whale. His parents were not permitted to come near the whale, and when some of the neighbors left some meat at their house, unnatural uncle scolded and forbade it being done again. "I can forgive him the killing of my brothers, the attempts on my life, but I will revenge his treatment of my parents." With these thoughts in his mind, the eagle left his perch and flew over to the crowd. He circled over its head a little while, and then made a swoop at his uncle. "Ah, he knows that I am chief, and the whale is mine, and he asks me for a piece of meat." Saying this, he threw a piece of meat at the eagle. The second time the eagle descended, it was still nearer the man's head, but he tried to laugh it off and turn it to his glory. The people, however, did not see it that way and warned him to keep out of the eagle's clutches, for the eagle meant mischief. When the eagle dropped the third time, it was so near his head that he fell on his face. The fourth time the eagle swooped him and flew off with him. Not far from the shore was a high and steep rock, and on its summit the eagle put down the man, placing himself opposite. When he had taken off the skin and disclosed himself, he said to his trembling uncle, "I could have forgiven you the death of my brothers, the 4 attempts on my life, but for the cruel treatment of my parents you shall pay. The whale I brought was for my parents and others, and not for you alone. But you took entire possession of it, and would not allow them even to approach it. I will not kill you without giving you a chance for your life. Swim back to the shore, and you shall be spared." As he could not swim, unnatural uncle supplicated his nephew to take him back, but the latter, putting on the eagle's skin and hardening his eagle heart, clutched him, and from a dizzy height in the air dropped him into the sea. From the beach the crowd watched the fatal act, understood and appreciated it, and, till it was dark, continued observing, from the distance, the eagle. When all had retired, he pulled off the skin and set out for his father's Barabara. He related to his parents his adventures, and invited them to accompany him to his adopted land, to which they gladly consented. Early in the morning he put on again his skin, and, taking a parent in each claw, flew with them to Eagle Land, and there they are living now. XXXIX. Blue Jay and his companions, Quinault. Farrand, Jessup North Pacific Expedition, 2. Blue Jay and his chief, with land otter, beaver, and another man, used to go out seal hunting together. In the same house with them, but at the other end, lived Grouse, who was a widower with a lot of children, and he spent most of his time in the woods building a canoe. Every trip that the Fee men made, they caught Fee seals, very fat ones, but they gave nothing but the poor, lean parts to Grouse. Blue Jay was at the bottom of this, and kept saying that fat was too good for Grouse, and he poked fun at him and sneered at him whenever he was about. Grouse never said a word, but took what was given him without complaining. One day Grouse made a wooden seal, carving it out of cedar, and burning it until it was black. Then he talked to the seal, and told it what it was to do, and it dived down into the water and went out to sea. Next day, before daylight, the Fee men started out, and about sunrise came upon a big seal, and speared it. The seal dived and swam to the westward, dragging the canoe after it until they were out of sight of land. The spearmen tried to get rid of it, but could not. And when night came they were still rushing westward, and when they waked in the morning they were still going, but not so fast. Not long afterward the line slackened, and they heard something butting against the canoe. Blue Jay looked over, and saw a wooden seal with a harpoon sticking into it just behind the fipper. Then his chief began to scold Blue Jay, and said, "I know this is Grouse's work. He is angry because we gave him no fat, and because you talked to him so much." Blue Jay could only hang his head and say nothing. They cut the line and began to paddle back, but had no idea where they were going. 3 days and 2 nights they paddled, and the third night they all fell asleep from exhaustion. When they waked in the morning, the canoe was stuck fast and they thought they were ashore, and one of them, the FFTH man, jumped out, but he sank and was drowned. And then they saw that they were not ashore, but that the seaweed was so thick that they had stuck fast in it. So now there were only 4 of them, and they paddled on. On the 4th night, they did not feel like sleeping, for they thought they could see the hills back of Quinault. In the morning they could discern the coast plainly, and after paddling all day, they reached the shore and landed at a place quite strange to them. Next morning they went on again in what they thought was a southerly direction, and suddenly, as they rounded a point, came upon a village. Several canoes came out through the surf and helped them ashore, and they were taken up to the village. In the center of the village was a tall, smooth pole, which the people said was Squirrel's pole, which he used for climbing. And they said that Squirrel would like to have a climbing match with Blue Jay. Blue Jay's master said to him, "Now don't get frightened, but go in and do your best. You know you can climb well, and if you are beaten, we may all be killed." Then both Squirrel and Blue Jay took sharp bones, so that if one got ahead, he could hit the one behind on the head, and they started to climb. All the people crowded around to see the contest, for the pole was high, and the two were well matched. At last the people saw them reach the top, and saw one of them strike the other on the head, so that he came tumbling down, and all the people shouted, for they thought it was Blue Jay. But when he reached the ground, they found it was Squirrel who had lost. So now, since Blue Jay had beaten their best climber, they let him and his companions go. They paddled on down the coast, and after some time they rounded a point and come upon another village, much like the FRSD. Here Hair Seal challenged Blue Jay to a diving match, and Blue Jay found himself in a difficult position, for he was no diver at all. But his master turned the canoe over and washed it out, leaving the brush from the bottom floating about it on the water. Then he told Blue Jay to accept the challenge and dive, but to come up under the brush and lie there concealed and not to show himself. So both Blue Jay and Hair Seal dived, and Blue Jay came up immediately under the brush. And found there where no one could see him. He waited until he shivered so with the cold that the brush moved with his shaking, and his master began to be afraid the people would notice it. So he rocked the canoe and made waves to conceal the motion of the brush, and no one suspected that Blue Jay was hidden there. Now, they had agreed that when the sun had passed from one tree to another not far off, each was to have the right to hit the other in the head with a sharp bone. So, when Blue Jay saw that the sun had reached the second tree, he dived down and found Hair Seal lying with his head down close to the bottom. Blue Jay jabbed him with the bone before Hair Seal knew what was happening, and Hair Seal came floating up to the surface. All the people shouted, "Blue Jay's up!" But it turned out to be Hair Seal, while Blue Jay went back under the brush without showing himself there. He waited about half an hour longer, and then came out shouting and laughing, and saying that he felt splendidly and not tired at all. In that way Hair Seal was beaten, and the people let Blue Jay and his party go on again. They paddled on, as before, until they came to another village, and there the people challenged the four wanderers to go into a sweat house with four of their people and see which could stand the most heat. So four of the village people went into one corner of the sweat house, and the four travelers into the other. Then the door was closed so that it was pitch dark, and soon it became very hot. But Beaver and Land Otter began to dig, and in a very short time they had tunneled to the river. Then all forgot into the water and were as comfortable as could be, while the four men from the village were nearly baked. When the time was up, Blue Jay and his friends came back into the sweat house, and when the door was open they all jumped out. Blue Jay and his friends were as fresh as possible, while the four men from the village were nearly cooked, and their eyes were all white from the heat. So, having beaten the people at their own game, they were allowed to go on, and paddling as hard as they could. Before they knew it, they had rounded another point and come upon a village as before. They ran the canoe clear up on the beach and tied it, and, taking their paddles, went into one of the houses. The people immediately challenged the new arrivals to sit up 3 days and 3 nights without sleeping against 4 of their own number. The friends were afraid not to accept, so they started the match. One party sat on one side of the house and the other on the other. The men from the village had spears, and when any one of them was falling asleep, they would prod him with a spear and wake him. They kept calling out to each other all night, "Are you awake? Are you still awake?" And they reviled each other constantly. Blue Jay did all the talking for his side and was hardly quiet a minute. All the next day they jeered at each other, and so they did the next night. Blue Jay and the spokesman of the other side kept talking back and forth the whole time. The next day they did the same thing, and so on the third night. And the fourth day and the fourth night it was still the same. On that night the men from the village nearly went to sleep, but Blue Jay's men were all right as yet. Blue Jay himself was almost done up, but his master would pull his ears and kept him awake, for Blue Jay's master was the best man of them all. The FFTH night the men of the village went to sleep, and Blue Jay's master told Land Otter and Beaver to dig so that they could get out. They did so, and fetched 4 pieces of old wood with phosphorescent spots on them, and they placed the pieces where they had been sitting, 1 piece for each man, and the spots looked like eyes. Then, while the other crowd was still sleeping, they got out, and, taking everything they could lay their hands on, they stole away in the canoe. Just before daylight, one of the other 4 waked, and called Blue Jay several times, but got no answer. So he waked the others, and, taking their spears, they speared what they thought were their rivals. But when daylight came, they saw that they had been fooled, and that their spears were sticking into wood. There was great excitement, and the people decided to give chase, and making ready their canoes, they started after the fugitives. Along in the afternoon, Blue Jay's master said, "I feel sure someone is following us." And looking back, they saw a lot of canoes in pursuit. Then they paddled with all their might. And Blue Jay's master paddled so hard that at every stroke he broke a paddle, until he had broken all they had, and they fought helpless. Then the others turned to Blue Jay and said, "You are always talking about your tamness. Make use of him now, if you have one, for we are in a bad FX." But Blue Jay could only hang his head, for he had no tamness. Then Land Otter called on his tamness, and a little wind arose. Then Beaver called upon his, and the wind became a little stronger, but all the time the other canoes were drawing closer. Then Blue Jay's master called upon his tamness, and there swept down a great storm and a fog. The storm lasted only a short time, and when it had passed, they looked about them and saw hundreds of capsized canoes, but not a man living, for all the people had been drowned. They went around and gathered up all the paddles they wanted, and went on, and at last reached the Quinault country, and were among good people. The people who had pursued them were probably Macaws, for they are a bad lot. Finally, they reached their home near Damon's Point, and after that, whenever they came in from sealing, they were careful to give grouse the biggest and fattest seal. XLI, Doug From Ground, Hoopa, Goddard, University of California Publications in American Archaeology and Ethnology. An old woman was living with her granddaughter, a virgin. The girl used to go to dig roots, and her grandmother used to say to her, "You must not dig those with two stalks." The girl wondered why she was always told that. One morning she thought, "I'm going to dig one." So she went across the river and began digging. She thought, "I'm going to take out one with a double stalk." When she had dug it out, she heard a baby cry. She ran back to the river, and when she got there, she heard someone crying "mother" after her. She jumped into the boat and pushed it across. When she got across, the baby had tumbled down to the other shore. She ran up to the house, and there she heard it crying on that side. She ran into the house. Then she heard it crying back of the house. At once she sat down, and then she heard it tumble on the roof of the house. The baby tumbled through the smoke hole and then rolled about on the floor. The old woman jumped up and put it in a baby basket. The young woman sat with her back to the FRE and never looked at the child. The old woman took care of the baby alone. After a time, it commenced to sit up and finally to walk. When he was big enough to shoot, the old woman made a bow, and he began to kill birds. Afterward, he killed all kinds of game, and because his mother never looked at him, he gave whatever he killed to his grandmother. Finally, he became a man. The young woman had been in the habit of going out at dawn and not returning until dark. She brought back with her acorns as long as her finger. One time the young man thought, "I am going to watch and see where she goes." The young woman had always said to herself, "If he will bring acorns from the place I bring them, and if he will kill a white deer, I will call him my son." Early one morning the son saw his mother come out of the house and start up the ridge. He followed her and saw her go along until she came to a dry tree. She climbed this, and it grew with her to the sky. The young man then returned, saying, "Tomorrow I am going up there." The woman came home at night with the usual load of long acorns. The next morning the man went the way his mother had gone, climbed the tree as he had seen her do, and it grew with him to the sky. When he arrived there, he saw a road. He followed that until he came to an oak, which he climbed, and waited to see what would happen. Soon he heard laughing girls approaching. They came to the tree and began to pick acorns from allotted spaces under it. The young man began to throw down acorns. "That's right, Blue Jay," said one of the girls. Then another said, "It might be dug from the ground. You can hardly look at him. They say he is so handsome." Two others said, "Oh, I can look at him. I always look at this walking one," pointing to the sun. "That is the one you can hardly look at." He came down from the tree and passed between the girls. The two who had boasted they could look at him turned their faces to the ground. The other two, who had thought they could not look him in the face, were able to do so. The young man killed the deer, the killing of which the mother had made the second condition for his recognition as a son. He then fled the basket from his mother's place under the tree and went home. When the woman saw him with the acorns as long as one's finger, she called him her son. After a time he said, "I am going visiting." "All right," said the grandmother. And then she made for him a bow and arrows of blue stone, and a shinny stick and sweat house wood of the same material. These he took and concealed by putting them under the muscles of his forearm. He dressed himself for the journey and set out. He went to the home of the immortals at the edge of the world toward the east. When he got down to the shore on this side, they saw him. One of them took out the canoe of red obsidian and stretched it until it was the proper size. See, he launched it and came across for him. When he had landed, the young man placed his hand on the bow, and as he did so, the boat gave a creak. He was so strong. When they had crossed, he went to the village. In the middle of it, he saw a house of blue stone with a pavement in front of black obsidian. He went in and heard one say, "It is my son-in-law, for whom I had expected to be a long time looking." When the sun had set, there came back from different places 10 brothers. Some had been playing kin, some had been playing shinny, some had been hunting, some spearing salmon, and others had been shooting at a mark. Eagle and Panther were both married to daughters of the family. They said to him, "You here, brother-in-law?" "Yes," he said, "I came a little while ago." When it was supper time, they put in front of him a basket of money's meat, which mortal man cannot swallow. He ate 2 baskets of it, and they thought he must be a smart man. After they had finished supper, they all went to the sweat house to spend the night. At midnight, the young man went to the river to swim. There he heard a voice say, "The sweat house wood is all gone." Then Mink told him that men could not find sweat house wood nearby, but that some was to be found to the southeast. They called to him for wood from 10 sweat houses, and he said yes to all. Mink told him about everything they would ask him to do. He went back to the sweat house and went in. When the east whitened with the dawn, he went for sweat house wood as they had told him. He came to the place where the trail forks, and one of them turns to the northeast and the other to the southeast. There he drew out from his arm the wood his grandmother had provided him with and split it FNE. He made this into 10 bundles and carried them back to the village. When he got there, he put them down carefully, but the whole earth shook with the shock. He carried a bundle to each sweat house. They all sweated themselves. He spent the day there, and at evening went again to the sweat house. When he went to the river to swim, Mink met him again and told him that the next day they would play shinny. After they were through breakfast the next morning, they said, "Come, brother-in-law, let us go to the place where they play shinny." They all went, and after placing their bets began to play. Twice they were beaten. Then they said, "Come, brother-in-law, play." They passed him a stick. He pressed down on it and broke it. "Let me pick up something," he said. He turned about and drew out his concealed shinny stick and the balls. Then he stepped out to play, and Wildcat came to play against him. The visitor made the stroke, and the balls fell very near the goal. Then he caught Wildcat, smashing his face into its present shape, and threw the ball over the line. He played again, this time with Fox. Again he made the stroke, and when he caught Fox, he pinched his face out long as it has been ever since. He then struck the ball over the line and won. The next time he played against Earthquake. The ground opened up a chasm, but he jumped over it. Earthquake threw up a wall of blue stone, but he threw the ball through it. Dole! It rang as it went through. Then he played with Thunder. It rained, and there was thunder. It was the running of that one which made the noise. It was then night, and he had won back all they had lost. There were 10 strings of money, besides otter skins, sure skins, and blankets. The next day they went to shoot at the white bird which Indians can never hit. The others commenced to shoot, and then they said to their guest, "Come, you better shoot." They gave him a bow, which broke when he drew it. Then he pulled out his own and said, "I will shoot with this, although the knock has been cut down, and it is not very good." They thought, "He can't hit anything with that." He shot and hit the bird, and Dentalia fell all about. They gathered up the money and carried it home. The Hoopa man went home to his grandmother. As many nights as it seemed to him he had spent, so many years he had really been away. He found his grandmother lying by the FRE. Both of the women had been worried about him. He said to them, "I have come back for you." "Yes," they said, "we will go." Then he repaired the house, tying it up anew with hazel withes. He poked a stick under it, and away it went to the end of the world toward the east, where he had married. They are living there yet. XXXIX. The Attack on the Giant Yelke, Guerrilla Apache, Russell, Journal of American Folklore, 11. In the early days, animals and birds of monstrous size preyed upon the people. The giant elk, the eagle, and others devoured men, women, and children, until the gods were petitioned for relief. A deliverer was sent to them in the person of Johnny Yan, the son of the old woman who lives in the west, and the second wife of the sun. She divided her time between the sun and the waterfall, and by the latter bore a second son, named Kodiak, who remained with his mother while his brother went forth to battle with the enemies of mankind. In 4 days Johnny Yan grew to manhood. Then he asked his mother where the elk lived. She told him that the elk was in a great desert far to the southward. She gave him arrows with which to kill the elk. In 4 steps he reached the distant desert where the elk was lying. Johnny Yan cautiously observed the position of the elk from behind a hill. The elk was lying on an open plain, where no trees or bushes were to be found that might serve to shelter Johnny Yan from view while he approached. While he was looking at the elk, with dried grass before his face, the lizard said to him, "What are you doing, my friend?" Johnny Yan explained his mission, whereupon the lizard suggested that he clothe himself in the garments of the lizard, in which he could approach the elk in safety. Johnny Yan tried 4 times before he succeeded in getting into the coat of the lizard. Next, the gopher came to him with the question, "What are you doing here, my friend?" When Johnny Yan told the gopher of his intention, the latter promised to aid him. The gopher thought it advisable to reconnoiter by burrowing his way underground to the elk. Johnny Yan watched the progress of the gopher as that animal threw out fresh heaps of earth on his way. At length the gopher came to the surface underneath the elk, whose giant heart was beating like a mighty hammer. He then proceeded to gnaw the hair from about the heart of the elk. "What are you doing?" said the elk. "I am cutting a few hairs for my little ones. They are now lying on the bare ground," replied the gopher, who continued until the magic coat of the elk was all cut away from about the heart of the elk. Then he returned to Johnny Yan and told the latter to go through the hole which he had made and shoot the elk. For times the son of the sun tried to enter the hole before he succeeded. When he reached the elk, he saw the great heart beating above him and easily pierced it with his arrows. For times his bow was drawn before he turned to escape through the tunnel which the gopher had been preparing for him. This hole extended far to the eastward, but the elk soon discovered it, and thrusting his antler into it, followed in pursuit. The elk plowed up the earth with such violence that the present mountains were formed, which extend from east to west. The black spider closed the hole with a strong web, but the elk broke through it and ran southward, forming the mountain chains which trend north and south. In the south the elk was checked by the web of the blue spider, in the west by that of the yellow spider, while in the north the web of the many-colored spider resisted his attacks until he fell dying from exhaustion and wounds. Johnny Yan made a coat from the hide of the elk, gave the front quarters to the gopher, the hind quarters to the lizard, and carried home the antlers. He found that the results of his adventures were not unknown to his mother, who had spent the time during his absence in singing, and watching a roll of cedar bark which sank into the earth or rose in the air as danger approached or receded from Johnny Yan, her son. Johnny Yan next desired to kill the great eagle, IDSA. His mother directed him to seek the eagle in the west. In 4 strides he reached the home of the eagle, an inaccessible rock on which was the nest, containing 2 young eaglets. His ear told him to stand facing the east when the next morning the eagle swooped down upon him and tried to carry him off. The talons of the eagle failed to penetrate the hard elk skin by which he was covered. "Turn to the south," said the ear, and again the eagle came and was again unsuccessful. Johnny Yan faced each of the 4 points in this manner, and again faced toward the east, whereupon the eagle succeeded in fastening its talons in the lacing on the front of the coat of the supposed man, who was carried to the nest above and thrown down before the young eagles, with the invitation to pick his eyes out. As they were about to do this, Johnny Yan gave a warning hiss, at which the young ones cried, He is living yet." "Oh no," replied the old eagle, "that is only the rush of air from his body through the holes made by my talons." Without stopping to verify this, the eagle flew away. Johnny threw some of the blood of the elk which he had brought with him to the young ones, and asked them when their mother returned. "In the afternoon when it rains," they answered. When the mother eagle came with a shower of rain in the afternoon, he stood in readiness with one of the elk antlers in his hand. As the bird alighted with a man in her talons, Johnny struck her upon the back with the antler, killing her instantly. Going back to the nest, he asked the young eagles when their father returned. "Our father comes home when the wind blows and brings rain just before sunset," they said. The male eagle came at the appointed time, carrying a woman with a crying infant upon her back. Mother and babe were dropped from a height upon the rock and killed. With the second antler of the elk, Johnny avenged their death and ended the career of the eagles by striking the eagle upon the back and killing him. The wing of this eagle was of enormous size. The bones were as large as a man's arm. Fragments of this wing are still preserved at Taos. Johnny struck the young eagles upon the head, saying, "You shall never grow any larger." Thus deprived of their strength and power to injure mankind, the eagles relinquished their sovereignty with the parting curse of rheumatism, which they bestowed upon the human race. Johnny could discover no way by which he could descend from the rock, until at length he saw an old female bat on the plain below. At FRSD, she pretended not to hear his calls for help. Then she flew up with the inquiry, "How did you get here?" Johnny told how he had killed the eagles. "I will give you all the feathers you may desire if you will help me to escape," concluded he. The old bat carried her basket by a slender spider's thread. He was afraid to trust himself in such a small basket suspended by a thread, but she reassured him, saying, "I have packed mountain sheep in this basket, and the strap is never broken. Do not look while we are descending. Keep your eyes shut as tight as you can." He began to open his eyes once during the descent, but she warned him in time to avoid mishap. They went to the foot of the rock where the old eagles lay. Johnny fled her basket with feathers, but told her not to go out on the plains, where there are many small birds. Forgetting this admonition, she was soon among the small birds, who robbed the old bat of all her feathers. This accounts for the plumage of the small bird cloakin, which somewhat resembles the color of the tail and wing feathers of the bald eagle. The bat returned 4 times for a supply of feathers, but the FFTH time she asked to have her basket fled, Johnny was vexed. "You cannot take care of your feathers, so you shall never have any. This old skin on your basket is good enough for you." "Very well," said the bat, resignedly. "I deserve to lose them, for I never could take care of those feathers." XLIV, Lodge Boy and Thrown Away, Crow, Sims, Field Museum, Anthropological Series, 2. Once upon a time there lived a couple, the woman being pregnant. The man went hunting one day, and in his absence a certain wicked woman named Red Woman came to the teepee and killed his wife and cut her open and found boy twins. She threw one behind the teepee curtain, and the other she threw into a spring. She then put a stick inside the woman and stuck one end in the ground to give her the appearance of a live person, and burned her upper lip, giving her the appearance as though laughing. When her husband came home, tired from carrying the deer he had killed, he saw his wife standing near the door of the teepee, looking as though she were laughing at him, and he said, "I am tired and hungry. Why do you laugh at me?" and pushed her. As she fell backwards, her stomach opened, and he caught hold of her and discovered she was dead. He knew at once that Red Woman had killed his wife. While the man was eating supper alone one night, a voice said, "Father, give me some of your supper." As no one was in sight, he resumed eating, and again the voice asked for supper. The man said, "Whoever you are, you may come and eat with me, for I am poor and alone." A young boy came from behind the curtain and said his name was Thrown Behind the Curtain. During the day, while the man went hunting, the boy stayed home. One day the boy said, "Father, make me 2 bows and the arrows for them." His father asked him why he wanted 2 bows. The boy said, "I want them to change." About. His father made them for him, but surmised the boy had other reasons, and concluded he would watch the boy, and on one day, earlier than usual, He left his teepee and hid upon a hill overlooking his teepee, and while there, he saw two boys of about the same age shooting arrows. That evening when he returned home, he asked his son, "Is there not another little boy of your age about here?" His son said, "Yes, and he lives in the spring." His father said, "You should bring him out and make him live with us." The son said, "I cannot make him because he has sharp teeth like an otter, but if you will make me a suit of rawhide, I will try and catch him." One day, arrangements were made to catch the boy. The father said, "I will stay here in the teepee, and you tell him I have gone out." So Thrown Behind the Curtain said to Thrown in Spring, "Come out and play arrows." Thrown in Spring came out just a little and said, "I smell something." Thrown Behind the Curtain said, "No, you don't, my father is not home." And after insisting, Thrown in Spring came out and both boys began to play. While they were playing, Thrown Behind a Curtain disputed a point of their game. And as Thrown in Spring stooped over to see how close his arrow came, Thrown Behind the Curtain grabbed him from behind and held his arms close to his sides, and Thrown in Spring turned and attempted to bite him. But his teeth could not penetrate the rawhide suit. The father came to the assistance of Thrown Behind the Curtain, and the water of the spring rushed out to help Thrown in Spring. But Thrown in Spring was dragged to a high hill where the water could not reach him, and there they burned incense under his nose, and he became human. The three of them lived together. One day, one of the boys said, "Let us go and wake up Mother." They went to the mother's grave, and one said, "Mother, your stone pot is dropping," and she moved. The other boy said, "Mother, your high dresser is falling," and she sat up. Then one of them said, "Mother, your bone crusher is falling," and she began to arrange her hair, which had begun to fall off. The mother said, "I have been asleep a long time." She accompanied the boys home. The boys were forbidden by their father to go to the river bend above their teepee, for an old woman lived there who had a boiling pot, and every time she saw any living object, she tilted the kettle toward it, and the object was drawn into the pot and boiled for her to eat. The boys went one day to see the old woman, and they found her asleep, and they stole up and got her pot and awakened the old woman and said to her, "Grandmother, why have you this here?" at the same time tilting the pot towards her, by which she was drowned and boiled to death. They took the pot home and gave it to their mother for her own protection. Their father told them not to disobey him again and said, "There is something over the hill I do not want you to go near." They were very anxious to find out what this thing was, and they went over to the hill, and as they poked their heads over the hilltop, the thing began to draw in air, and the boys were drawn in also. And as they went in, they saw people and animals, some dead and others dying. The thing proved to be an immense alligator-like serpent. One of the boys touched the kidneys of the thing and asked what they were. The alligator said, "That is my medicine, do not touch it." And the boy reached up and touched its heart and asked what it was, and the serpent grunted and said, "This is where I make my plans." One of the boys said, "You do make plans, do you?" And he cut the heart off, and it died. They made their escape by cutting between the ribs and liberated the living ones, and took a piece of the heart home to their father. After the father had administered another scolding, he told the boys not to go near the 3 trees standing in a triangular-shaped piece of ground, for if anything went under them, they would bend to the ground suddenly, killing everything in their way. One day the boys went towards these trees, running swiftly and then stopping suddenly near the trees, which bent violently and struck the ground without hitting them. They jumped over the trees, breaking the branches, and they could not rise after the branches were broken. Once more the boys were scolded and told not to go near a teepee over the hill, for it was inhabited by snakes, and they would approach anyone asleep and enter his body through the rectum. Again the boys did as they were told not to do and went to the teepee, and the snakes invited them in. They went in and carried fat pieces of stone with them, and as they sat down they placed the fat pieces of stones under their rectums. After they had been in the teepee a short while, the snakes began putting their heads over the poles around the frepolis, and the snakes began to relate stories. And one of them said, "When there is a drizzling rain, and when we are under cover, it is nice to sleep." One of the boys said, "When we are lying down under the pine trees and the wind blows softly through them and has a weird sound, it is nice to sleep." All but one of the snakes went to sleep, and that one tried to enter the rectum of each of the boys and failed, on account of the fat stone. The boys killed all of the other snakes, but that one, and they took that one and rubbed its head against the side of a cliff, and that is the reason why snakes have fattened heads. Again the boys were scolded by their father, who said, "There is a man living on the steep-cut bank, with deep water under it. And if you go near it, he will push you over the bank into the water for his father and the water to eat." The boys went to the place, but before going, they fexed their headdresses with dried grass. Upon their arrival at the edge of the bank, one said to the other, "Just as he is about to push you over, lie down quickly." The man from his hiding place suddenly rushed out to push the boys over, and just as he was about to do it, the boys threw themselves quickly upon the ground, and the man went over their heads, pulling their headdress with him, and his father in the water ate him. Upon the boys' return, and after telling what they had done, their father scolded them and told them, "There is a man who wears moccasins of Fre, and when he wants anything, he goes around it, and it is burned up." The boys ascertained where this man lived and stole upon him one day, when he was sleeping under a tree, and each one of the boys took off a moccasin and put it on, and they awoke him and ran about him, and he was burned and went up in smoke. They took the moccasins home. Their father told them that something would yet happen to them, for they had killed so many bad things. One day, while walking the valley, they were lifted from the earth, and after traveling in mid-air for some time, they were placed on top of a peak in a rough, high mountain with a big lake surrounding it, and the thunderbird said to them, "I want you to kill a long otter that lives in the lake. He eats all the young ones that I produce, and I cannot make him stop." So the boys began to make arrows, and they gathered dry pine sticks and began to heat rocks, and the long otter came towards them. As it opened its mouth, the boys shot arrows into it, and as that did not stop it from drawing nearer, they threw the hot rocks down its throat, and it curled up and died afterwards. They were taken up and carried through the air and gently placed upon the ground near their homes, where they lived for many years. XLV, Blood Clot Boy, Blackfoot, Whistler and Duval, Anthropological Papers, American Museum of Natural History. 2. Once there was an old man and woman whose 3 daughters married a young man. The old people lived in a lodge by themselves. The young man was supposed to hunt buffalo and feed them all. Early in the morning, the young man invited his father-in-law to go out with him to kill buffalo. The old man was then directed to drive the buffalo through a gap where the young man stationed himself to kill them as they went by. As soon as the buffalo were killed, the young man requested his father-in-law to go home. He said, "You are old. You need not stay here. Your daughters can bring you some meat." Now the young man lied to his father-in-law, for when the meat was brought to his lodge, he ordered his wives not to give meat to the old folks. Yet one of the daughters took pity on her parents and stole meat for them. The way in which she did this was to take a piece of meat in her robe, and as she went for water, drop it in front of her father's lodge. Now every morning the young man invited his father-in-law to hunt buffalo, and as before, sent him away and refused to permit his daughters to furnish meat for the old people. On the 4th day, as the old man was returning, he saw a clot of blood in the trail, and said to himself, "Here at least is something from which we can make soup." In order that he might not be seen by his son-in-law, he stumbled and spilt the arrows out of his quiver. Now, as he picked up the arrows, he put the clot of blood into the quiver. Just then the young man came up and demanded to know what it was he picked up. The old man explained that he had just stumbled and was picking up his arrows. So the old man took the clot of blood home and requested his wife to make blood soup. When the pot began to boil, the old woman heard a child crying. She looked all around, but saw nothing. Then she heard it again. This time it seemed to be in the pot. She looked in quickly and saw a boy baby. So she lifted the pot from the Fre, took the baby out and wrapped it up. Now the young man, sitting in his lodge, heard a baby crying and said, "Well, the old woman must have a baby." Then he sent his oldest wife over to see the old woman's baby, saying, "If it is a boy, I will kill it." The woman came in to look at the baby, but the old woman told her it was a girl. When the young man heard this, he did not believe it. So he sent each wife in turn, but they all came back with the same report. Now the young man was greatly pleased because he could look forward to another wife. So he sent over some old bones that soup might be made for the baby. Now all this happened in the morning. That night the baby spoke to the old man, saying, "You take me up and hold me against each lodgepole in succession." So the old man took up the baby and, beginning at the door, went around in the direction of the sun, and each time that he touched a pole, the baby became larger. When halfway around, the baby was so heavy that the old man could hold him no longer. So he put the baby down in the middle of the lodge, and, taking hold of his head, moved it toward each of the poles in succession, and when the last pole was reached, the baby had become a very young man. Then this young man went out, got some black flint, obsidian, and when he got to the lodge, he said to the old man, "I am the smoking star. I came down to help you. When I have done this, I shall return." Now, when morning came, Bloodclot, the name his father gave him, arose and took his father out to hunt. They had not gone very far when they killed a scabby cow. Then Bloodclot lay down behind the cow and requested his father to wait until the son-in-law came to join him. He also requested that he stand his ground and talk back to the son-in-law. Now, at the usual time in the morning, the son-in-law called at the lodge of the old man, but was told that he had gone out to hunt. This made him very angry, and he struck at the old woman, saying, "I have a notion to kill you." So the son-in-law went out. Now Bloodclot had directed his father to be eating a kidney when the son-in-law approached. When the son-in-law came up and saw all this, he was very angry. He said to the old man, "Now you shall die for all this." "Well," said the old man, "you must die too, for all that you have done." Then the son-in-law began to shoot arrows at the old man, and the latter, becoming frightened, called on Bloodclot for help. Then Bloodclot sprang up and upbraided the son-in-law for his cruelty. "Oh," said the son-in-law, "I was just fooling." At this, Bloodclot shot the son-in-law through and through. Then Bloodclot said to his father, "We will leave this meat here. It is not good. Your son-in-law's house is full of dried meat. Which one of your daughters helped you?" The old man told him that it was the youngest. Then Bloodclot went to the lodge, killed the two older women, brought up the body of the son-in-law, and burned them together. Then he requested the younger daughter to take care of her old parents, to be kind to them, etc. "Now," said Bloodclot, "I shall go to visit the other Indians." So he started out, and finally came to a camp. He went into the lodge of some old women, who were very much surprised to see such a young man. They said, "Why do you come here among such old women as we? Why don't you go where there are young people?" "Well," said Bloodclot, "give me some dried meat." Then the old woman gave him some meat, but no fat. "Well," said Bloodclot, "you did not give me the fat to eat with my dried meat." "Hush," said the old woman. "You must not speak so loud. There are bears here that take all the fat and give us the lean, and they will kill you if they hear you." "Well," said Bloodclot, "I will go out tomorrow, do some butchering, and get some fat." Then he went out through the camp, telling all the people to make ready in the morning, for he intended to drive the buffalo over the drive. Now there were some bears who ruled over this camp. They lived in a bear lodge, painted lodge, and were very cruel. When Bloodclot had driven the buffalo over, he noticed among them a scabby cow. He said, "I shall save this for the old women." Then the people laughed and said, "Do you mean to save that poor old beast? It is too poor to have fat." However, when it was cut open, it was found to be very fat. Now, when the bears heard the buffalo go over the drive, they as usual sent out 2 bears to cut off the best meat, especially all the fat. But Bloodclot had already butchered the buffalo, putting the fat upon sticks. He hid it as the bears came up. Also, he had heated some stones in a FRE. When they told him what they wanted, he ordered them to go back. Now the bears were very angry, and the chief bear and his wife came up to FGHD, but Bloodclot killed them by throwing hot stones down their throats. Then he went down to the lodge of the bears and killed all, except one female who was about to become a mother. She pleaded so pitifully for her life that he spared her. If he had not done this, there would have been no more bears in the world. The lodge of the bears was fled with dried meat and other property. Also, all the young women of the camp were confined there. Bloodclot gave all the property to the old women and set free all the young women. The bear's lodge he gave to the old women. It was a bear-painted lodge. Now, said Bloodclot, I must go on my travels. He came to a camp and entered the lodge of some old women. When these women saw what a effing young man he was, they said, Why do you come here, among such old women? Why do you not go where there are younger people? Well, said he, give me some meat. The old women gave him some dried meat, but no fat. Then he said, Why do you not give me some fat with my meat? Hush, said the women. You must not speak so loud. There is a snake lodge, painted lodge, here, and the snakes take everything. They leave no fat for the people. Well, said Bloodclot, I will go over to the snake lodge to eat. No, you must not do that, said the old women. It is dangerous. They will surely kill you. Well, said he, I must have some fat with my meat, even if they do kill me. Then he entered the snake lodge. He had his white rock knife ready. Now the snake, who was the head man in this lodge, had one horn on his head. He was lying with his head in the lap of a beautiful woman. He was asleep. By the FRE was a bowl of berry soup ready for the snake when he should wake. Bloodclot seized the bowl and drank the soup. Then the women warned him in whispers, You must go away. You must not stay here. But he said, I want to smoke. So he took out his knife and cut off the head of the snake, saying as he did so, Wake up, light a pipe. I want to smoke. Then with his knife he began to kill all the snakes. At last there was one snake who was about to become a mother, and she pleaded so pitifully for her life that she was allowed to go. From her descended all the snakes that are in the world. Now the lodge of the snakes was flooded up with dried meat of every kind, fat, etc. Bloodclot turned all this over to the people, the lodge, and everything it contained. Then he said, I must go away and visit other people. So he started out. Some old women advised him to keep on the south side of the road, because it was dangerous the other way. But Bloodclot paid no attention to their warning. As he was going along, a great windstorm struck him and at last carried him into the mouth of a great FSH. This was a sucker FSH, and the wind was its sucking. When he got into the stomach of the FSH, he saw a great many people. Many of them were dead, but some were still alive. He said to the people, there must be a heart somewhere here. We will have a dance. So he painted his face white, his eyes and mouth with black circles, and tied a white rock knife on his head, so that the point stuck up. Some rattles made of hoofs were also brought. Then the people started in to dance. For a while Bloodclot sat making wing motions with his hands and singing songs. Then he stood up and danced, jumping up and down until the knife on his head struck the heart. Then he cut the heart down. Next he cut through between the ribs of the FSH and let all the people out. Again Bloodclot said he must go on his travels. Before starting, the people warned him, saying that after a while he would see a woman who was always challenging people to wrestle with her, but that he must not speak to her. He gave no heed to what they said, and after he had gone a little way, he saw a woman who called him to come over. No, said Bloodclot, I am in a hurry. However, at the fourth time the woman asked him to come over, he said, Yes, but you must wait a little while, for I am tired. I wish to rest. When I have rested, I will come over and wrestle with you. Now, while he was resting, he saw many large knives sticking up from the ground, almost hidden by straw. Then he knew that the woman killed the people she wrestled with by throwing them down on the knives. When he was rested, he went over. The woman asked him to stand up in the place where he had seen the knives. But he said, No, I am not quite ready. Let us play a little before we begin. So he began to play with the woman, but quickly caught hold of her, threw her upon the knives, and cut her in two. Bloodclot took up his travels again, and after a while came to a camp where there were some old women. The old women told him that a little farther on he would come to a woman with a swing, but on no account must he ride with her. After a time, he came to a place where he saw a swing on the bank of a swift stream. There was a woman swinging on it. He watched her a while and saw that she killed people by swinging them out and dropping them into the water. When he found this out, He came up to the woman. "You have a swing here. Let me see you swing," he said. "No," said the woman. "I want to see you swing." "Well," said Bloodclot, "but you must swing FRSD." "Well," said the woman. "Now I shall swing. Watch me. Then I shall see you do it." So the woman swung out over the stream. As she did this, he saw how it worked. Then he said to the woman, "You swing again while I am getting ready." But as the woman swung out this time, he cut the vine and let her drop into the water. This happened on Cutbank Creek. "Now," said Bloodclot, "I have rid the world of all the monsters. I will go back to my old father and mother." So he climbed a high ridge and returned to the lodge of the old couple. One day he said to them, "I shall go back to the place from whence I came. If you effendi that I have been killed, you must not be sorry, for then I shall go up into the sky and become the smoking star." Then he went on until he was killed by some Crow Indians on the warpath. His body was never found, but the moment he was killed, the smoking star appeared in the sky, where we see it now. XLVI. The Son-in-Law Tests, Tamagami Ojibwe. Spec. Memoirs of the Geological Survey of Canada. Anthropological Series 9. Wemicus, the animal trickster, had a son-in-law who was a man. This man's wife, the daughter of Wemicus, had had a great many husbands, because Wemicus had put them to so many different tests that they had been all killed off except this one. He, however, had succeeded in outwitting Wemicus in every scheme that he tried on him. Wemicus and this man hunted beaver in the spring of the year by driving them all day with dogs. The man's wife warned him before they started out to hunt, saying, "Look out for my father. He might burn your moccasins in camp. That's what he did to my other husbands." That night in camp, Wemicus said, "I didn't tell you the name of this lake. It is called Burnt Moccasins Lake." When the man heard this, he thought that Wemicus was up to some sort of mischief and was going to burn his moccasins. Their moccasins were hanging up before a FRE to dry, and while Wemicus was not looking, the man changed the places of Wemicus' moccasins and his own, and then went to sleep. Soon the man awoke and saw Wemicus get up and throw his own moccasins into the FRE. Wemicus then said, "Say, something is burning. It is your moccasins." Then the man answered, "No, not mine, but yours." So Wemicus had no moccasins, and the ground was covered with snow. After this had happened, the man slept with his moccasins on. The next morning the man started on and left Wemicus there with no shoes. Wemicus started to work. He got a big boulder, made a FRE, and placed the boulder in it until it became red hot. He then wrapped his feet with spruce boughs and pushed the boulder ahead of him in order to melt the snow. In this way, he managed to walk on the boughs. Then he began to sing, "Spruce is warm, spruce is warm." When the man reached home, he told his wife what had happened. "I hope Wemicus will die," she said. A little while after this, they heard Wemicus coming along singing, "Spruce is warm, spruce is warm." He came into the wigwam, and as he was the head man, they were obliged to get his meal ready. The ice was getting bad by this time, so they stayed in camp a while. Soon Wemicus told his son-in-law, "We'd better go sliding." He then went to a hill where there were some very poisonous snakes. The man's wife warned her husband of these snakes and gave him a split stick holding a certain kind of magic tobacco, which she told him to hold in front of him so that the snakes would not hurt him. Then the two men went sliding. At the top of the hill, Wemicus said, "Follow me," for he intended to pass close by the snake's lair. So when they slid, Wemicus passed safely, and the man held his stick with the tobacco in it in front of him, thus preventing the snakes from biting him. The man then told Wemicus that he enjoyed the sliding. The following day, Wemicus said to his son-in-law, "We had better go to another place." When she heard this, the wife told her husband that, as it was getting summer, Wemicus had in his head many poisonous lizards instead of lice. She said, "He will tell you to pick lice from his head and crack them in your teeth. But take lowbush cranberries and crack them instead." So the man took cranberries along with him. Wemicus took his son-in-law to a valley with a great ravine in it. He said, "I wonder if anybody can jump across this?" "Surely," said the young man, "I can." Then the young man said, "Closer," and the ravine narrowed, and he jumped across easily. When Wemicus tried, the young man said, "Widen," and Wemicus fell into the ravine. But it did not kill him, and when he made his way to the top again, he said, "You have beaten me." Then they went on. They came to a place of hot sand, and Wemicus said, "You must look for lice in my head." "All right, father," replied the son-in-law. So Wemicus lay down, and the man started to pick the lice. He took the cranberries from inside his shirt, and each time he pretended to catch a louse, he cracked a cranberry and threw it on the ground. And so Wemicus got fooled a second time that day. Then they went home, and Wemicus said to his son-in-law, "There are a whole lot of eggs on that rocky island where the gulls are. We will go get the eggs, come back, and have an egg supper." As Wemicus was the head man, his son-in-law had to obey him. So they started out in their canoe and soon came to the rocky island. Wemicus stayed in the canoe and told the man to go ashore and to bring the eggs back with him and FLL the canoe. When the man reached the shore, Wemicus told him to go farther back on the island, saying, "That's where the former husbands got their eggs. There are their bones." He then started the canoe off in the water by singing, without using his paddle. Then Wemicus told the gulls to eat the man, saying to them, "I give you him to eat." The gulls started to FY about the man, but the man had his paddle with him, and he killed one of the gulls with it. He then took the gull's wings and fastened them on himself, fled his shirt with eggs, and started flying over the lake by the aid of the wings. When he reached the middle of the lake, he saw Wemicus going along and singing to himself. Wemicus, looking up, saw his son-in-law but mistook him for a gull. The man flew back to camp and told his wife to cook the eggs, and he told his children to play with the wings. When Wemicus reached the camp, he saw the children playing with the wings and said, "Where did you get those wings?" "From father," was the reply. "Your father? Why, the gulls ate him." Then he went to the wigwam, and there he saw the man smoking. Then Wemicus thought it very strange how the man could have gotten home, but no one told him how it had been done. Thought he, "I must try another scheme to do away with him." One day Wemicus said to his son-in-law, "We'd better make 2 canoes of birch bark, one for you and one for me. We'd better get bark." So they started off for birch bark. They cut a tree almost through, and Wemicus said to his son-in-law, "You sit on that side and I'll sit on this." He wanted the tree to fall on him and kill him. Wemicus said, "You say, 'Fall on my father-in-law,' and I'll say, 'Fall on my son-in-law,' and whoever says it too slowly or makes a mistake will be the one on whom it will fall." But Wemicus made the FRSD mistake, and the tree fell on him and crushed him. However, Wemicus was a Manitou and was not hurt. They went home with the bark and made the 2 canoes. After they were made, Wemicus said to his son-in-law, "Well, we'll have a race in our 2 canoes, a sailing race." Wemicus made a big bark sail, but the man did not make any as. He was afraid of upsetting. They started the race. Wemicus went very fast, and the man called after him, "Oh, you are beating me." He kept on fooling and encouraging Wemicus until the wind upset Wemicus' canoe, and that was the end of Wemicus. When the man sailed over the spot where Wemicus had upset, he saw a big pike there, into which Wemicus had been transformed when the canoe upset. This is the origin of the pike. XLVI, The Jealous Father, Series, Skinner, Anthropological Papers of the American Museum of Natural History 9. Once there was an old man named Iasui who had 2 wives. When his son by one of these women began to grow up, Iasui became jealous of him. One day, he went off to hunt, and when he came back, found marks on one of the women, the co-wife with his son's mother, which proved to him that his son had been on terms of intimacy with her. One day the old man and the boy went to a rocky island to hunt for eggs. Wishing to get rid of his son, the old man persuaded him to gather eggs farther and farther away from the shore. The young man did not suspect anything until he looked up and saw his father paddling off in the canoe. "Why are you deserting me, father?" he cried. "Because you have played tricks on your stepmother," answered the old man. When the boy found that he was really left behind, he sat there crying hour after hour. At last, Walrus appeared. He came near the island and stuck his head above the water. "What are you crying for, my son?" said Walrus. "My father has deserted me on this island, and I want to get home to the mainland. Will you not help me to get ashore?" The boy replied. Walrus said that he would do so willingly. "Get on my back," said Walrus, "and I will take you to the mainland." Then Walrus asked Iaswe's son if the sky was clear. The boy replied that it was, but this was a lie, for he saw many clouds. Iaswe's son said this because he was afraid that Walrus would desert him if he knew it was cloudy. Walrus said, "If you think I am not going fast enough, strike on my horns, tusks, and let me know when you think it is shallow enough for you to get ashore. Then you can jump off my back and walk to the land." As they went along, Walrus said to the boy, "Now, my son, you must let me know if you hear it thunder, because as soon as it thunders, I must go right under the water." The boy promised to let Walrus know. They had not gone far when there came a peal of thunder. Walrus said, "My son, I hear thunder." "Oh no, you are mistaken," said the boy who feared to be drowned. "What you think is thunder is only the noise your body makes going so quickly through the water." Walrus believed the boy and thought he must have been wrong. Some time later, there came another peal of thunder, and this time, Walrus knew he was not mistaken. He was sure it was thunder. He was very angry and said he would drop Iaswe's son there, whether the water was shallow or not. He did so, but the lad had duped Walrus with his lies so that he came where the water was very shallow, and the boy escaped, but Walrus was killed by lightning before he could reach water deep enough to dive in. This thunderstorm was sent to destroy Walrus by Iaswe's father, who conjured for it. Walrus, on the other hand, was the result of conjuring by his mother, who wished to save her son's life. When Iaswe's son reached the shore, he started for home, but he had not gone far before he met an old woman who had been sent as the result of a wish for his safety by his mother, or was a wish for his safety on his mother's part, personified. The old woman instructed the lad how to conduct himself if he ever expected to reach his home and mother again. "Now you have come ashore, there is still a lot of trouble for you to go through before you reach home," said she, and she gave him the stuffed skin of an ermine, weasel, and white winter coat. "This will be one of your weapons to use to protect yourself," were her words as she tendered him this gift, and she told him what dangers he would encounter and what to do in each case. Then the son of Iaswe started for his home once more. As he journeyed through the forest, he came upon a solitary wigwam inhabited by two old blind hags, who were the result of an adverse conjuration by his father. Both of these old women had sharp bones like daggers, protruding from the lower arm at the elbow. They were very savage and used to kill everybody they met. When Iaswe's son approached the tent, although the witches could not see him, they knew from their magic powers that he was near. They asked him to come in and sit down, but he was suspicious, for he did not like the looks of their elbows. He thought of a plan by which he might dupe the old women into killing each other. Instead of going himself and sitting between them, he got a large parchment and fixing it to the end of a pole, he poked it in between them. The old women heard it rattle and thought it was the boy himself coming to sit between them. Then they both turned their backs to the skin and began to hit away at it with their elbows. Every time they stabbed the skin, they cried out, "I am hitting the son of Iaswe. I've hit him! I've hit him!" At last, they got so near each other that they began to hit one another, calling out all the time, "I am hitting the son of Iaswe." They finally stabbed each other to death, and the son of Iaswe escaped this danger also. When the young man had vanquished the two old women, he proceeded on his journey. He had not gone very far when he came to a row of dried human bones hung across the path, so that no one could pass by without making them rattle. Not far away, there was a tent full of people and big dogs. Whenever they heard anyone disturb the bones, they would set upon him and kill him. The old woman who had advised Iaswe's son told him that when he came to this place, he could escape by digging a tunnel in the path under the bones. When he arrived at the spot, he began to follow her advice and burrow under. He was careless, and when he was very nearly done and completely out of sight, he managed to rattle the bones. At once, the dogs heard and they cried out, "That must be Iaswe's son." All the people ran out at once, but since Iaswe's son was underground in the tunnel, they could not see him. So after they had searched for a while, they returned. The dogs said, "We are sure this is the son of Iaswe," and they continued to search. At length, They found the mouth of the hole XXXIX son had dug. The dogs came to the edge and began to bark till all the people ran out again with their weapons. Then XXXIX son took the stuffed ermine skin and poked its head up. All the people saw it and thought it was really ermine. Then they were angry and killed the dogs for lying. XXXIX son escaped again, and this time he got home. When he drew near his father's wigwam, he could hear his mother crying, and as he approached still closer, he saw her. She looked up and saw him coming. She cried out to her husband and co-wife, "My son has come home again." The old man did not believe it. "It is not possible," he cried, but his wife insisted on it. Then the old man came out, and when he saw it was really his son, he was very much frightened for his own safety. He called out to his other wife, "Bring some caribou skins and spread them out for my son to walk on." But the boy kicked them away. "I have come a long way," said he, "with only my bare feet to walk on." That night, the boy sang a song about the burning of the world, and the old man sang against him, but he was not strong enough. "I am going to set the world on fire," said the boy to his father. "I shall make all the lakes and rivers boil." He took up an arrow and said, "I am going to shoot this arrow into the woods. See if I don't set them on fire." He shot his arrow into the bush, and a great blaze sprang up, and all the woods began to burn. "The forest is now on fire," said the old man, "but the water is not yet burning." "I'll show you how I can make the water boil also," said his son. He shot another arrow into the water, and it immediately began to boil. Then the old man who wished to escape said to his son, "How shall we escape?" The old man had been a great bear hunter and had a large quantity of bear's grease preserved in a bark basket. "Go into your fat basket," said his son. "You will be perfectly safe there." Then he drew a circle on the ground and placed his mother there. The ground enclosed by the circle was not even scorched, but the wicked old man who had believed he would be safe in the grease baskets was burned to death. XXXIX son said to his mother, "Let us become birds." "What will you be?" "I'll be a robin," said she. "I'll be a whiskey jack, Canada jay," he replied. They flew off together. 48. Dirty Boy. Okanagan. Tight. Memoirs of the American Folklore Society. 11. The people of a certain region were living together in a very large camp. Their chief had two beautiful daughters of marriageable age. Many young men had proposed to them, but all had been refused. The chief said, "Whom do my daughters wish to marry?" "They have refused all the men." Sun and Star, who were brother and sister, lived in the sky and had seen all that had happened. Sun said to his sister, "The chief's daughters have rejected the suits of all our friends. Let us go down and arrange this matter. Let us try these girls." They made clothes, and at night they descended to earth. During the darkness, they erected a lodge on the outskirts of the camp. It had the appearance of being very old and of belonging to poor people. The poles were old and badly selected. The covering was tattered and patched and made of tule mats. The floor was strewn with old dried brush and grass, and the beds were of the same material. Their blankets consisted of old mats and pieces of old robes, and their kettles and cups were of bark, poorly made. Star had assumed the form of a decrepit old woman dressed in rags, and Sun, that of a dirty boy with sore eyes. On the following morning the women of the camp saw the lodge and peered in. When they returned, they reported, "Some very poor people arrived during the night and are camped in an old mat lodge. We saw two persons inside, a dirty, sore-eyed boy and his grandmother, a very old woman in ragged clothes." Now, the chief resolved to effendi husbands for his daughters. He sent out his speaker to announce that in 4 days there would be a shooting contest open to all the men, and the best marksman would get his daughters for wives. The young men could not sleep for eagerness. On the 3rd day the chief speaker announced, "Tomorrow morning everyone shall shoot. Each one will have 2 shots. An eagle will perch on the tall tree yonder, and whoever kills it shall have the chief's daughters." Coyote was there and felt happy. He thought he would win the prize. On the following morning an eagle was seen soaring in the air, and there was much excitement as it began to descend. It alighted on a tree which grew near one end of the camp. Then the young men tried to shoot it. Each man had 2 arrows. The previous evening's sun had said to Star, "Grandmother, make a bow and arrows for me." She said, "What is the use? You cannot shoot. You never used bow and arrows." He replied, "I am going to try. I shall take part in the contest tomorrow." I heard what the chief said. She took pity on him and went to a red willow bush, cut a branch for a bow and some twigs for arrows. She strung the bow with a poor string and did not feather the arrows. Coyote, who was afraid someone else might hit the bird, shouted, "I will shoot FRSD, watch me hit the eagle." His arrow struck the lowest branch of the tree and fell down, and the people laughed. He said, "I made a mistake. That was a bad arrow. This one will kill the eagle." He shot, and the arrow fell short of the FRSD one. He became angry and pulled other arrows from his quiver. He wanted to shoot them all. The people seized him and took away his arrows, saying, "You are allowed to shoot twice only." All the people shot and missed. When the last one had shot, Son said, "Grandmother, lift the door of the lodge a little so that I can shoot." She said, "First get out of bed." She pulled the lodge mat aside a little, and he shot. The arrow hit the tail of the eagle. The people saw and heard the arrow coming from Dirty Boy's lodge, but saw no one shooting it. They wondered. He shot the second arrow, which pierced the eagle's heart. Now, Wolf and others were standing near Dirty Boy's lodge, and Wolf desired much to claim the prize. He shouted, "I shot the bird from the lodge door," and ran to pick it up, but the old woman Star ran faster than he, picked up the bird, and carried it to the chief. She claimed his daughters for her grandson. All the people gathered around and made fun of Dirty Boy. They said, "He is bedridden. He is lousy, sore-eyed, and scabby-faced." The chief was loath to give his daughters to such a person. He knew that Dirty Boy could not walk. Therefore he said, "Tomorrow there shall be another contest. This will be the last one. I cannot break my word. Whoever wins this time shall have my daughters." He announced that on the morrow, each man should set 2 traps for shares, an animal very scarce at the place where the camp was located. If anyone should catch a Fshere one night, then he was to stay in the mountains another day to catch a second one. After that he had to come back. Those who caught nothing the FRSD night had to come home at once. Only 2 traps were allowed to each man, and 2 shares had to be caught, one a light one, and one a dark one, and both prime skins. When all the men had gone to the mountains, Son said to his sister, "Grandmother, make 2 traps for me." She answered, "First get out of bed." However, she had pity on him and made 2 deadfalls of willow sticks. She asked him where she should set them, and he said, "One on each side of the lodge door." On the following morning, all the men returned by noon. Not one of them had caught a Fshere. When Star went out, she found 2 shares in the traps. Now the chief assembled the men to see if anyone had caught the shares. He was glad because he knew that Dirty Boy could not walk, and unless he went to the mountains, he had no chance to kill shares. Just then the old grandmother appeared, dragging the shares. She said, "I hear you asked for 2 shares. Here are 2 that my grandson caught." She handed them over to him and then left. Coyote had boasted that he would certainly catch the shares. When he went up the mountain, he carried 10 traps instead of 2. He said, "Whoever heard of setting only 2 traps? I shall set 10. He set them all, remained out 2 nights, but got nothing. The chief said to his daughters, "You must become the wives of Dirty Boy. I tried to save you by having 2 contests, but since I am a great chief, I cannot break my word. Go now and take up your abode with your husband." They put on their best clothes and went. On the way, they had to pass Raven's house and heard the ravens laughing inside because the girls had to marry Dirty Boy. The elder sister said, "Let us go in and see what they are laughing about." The younger one said, "No, our father told us to go straight to our husband." The elder one went in and sat down beside Raven's eldest son. She became his wife. Like all the other ravens, he was ugly and had a big head, but she thought it better to marry him than to become the wife of a dirty, sickly boy. The younger one went on, entered Dirty Boy's lodge, and sat down by his side. The old woman asked her who she was and why she had come. When the old woman had been told, she said, "Your husband is sick, and soon he will die. He stinks too much. You must not sleep with him. Go back to your father's lodge every evening, but come here in the daytime and watch him and attend him." Now, the Raven family that lived close by laughed much at the younger daughter of the chief. They were angry because she had not entered their house and married there, as her elder sister had done. To hurt her feelings, they dressed their new daughter-in-law in the finest clothes they had. Her dress was covered with beads, shells, elk's teeth, and quill work. They gave her necklaces, and her mother-in-law gave her a finely polished celt of green stone jade to hang at her belt. The younger sister paid no attention to this, but returned every morning to help her grandmother-in-law to gather firewood and to attend to her sick husband. For 3 days matters remained this way. In the evening of the third day, son said to his sister, "We will resume our true forms tonight so that people may see us tomorrow." That night they transformed themselves. The old mat lodge became a effing new skin lodge, surpassing those of the Blackfeet. And other tribes, richly decorated with ornaments, and with streamers tied to the top and painted. The old bark kettle became a bright copper kettle, and new pretty woven baskets and embroidered and painted bags were in the house. The old woman became a effing-looking person of tall figure, with clothes covered with shining stars. Dirty Boy became a young, handsome man of light complexion. His clothes were covered with shining copper. His hair reached to the ground and shone like the rays of the sun. In the morning the people saw the new lodge and said, "Some rich chief has arrived and has camped where the poor people were. He has thrown them out." When the girl arrived, she was much surprised to see the transformation. She saw a woman in the door, wearing a long-skin dress covered with star pendants, with bright stars in her hair. She addressed her in a familiar voice, saying, "Come in and sit with your husband." The girl then knew who she was. When she entered, she saw a handsome man reclining, with his head on a beautiful parfaiche. His garments and hair were decorated with bright suns. The girl did not recognize him and looked around. The woman said, "That is your husband. Go and sit beside him." Then she was glad. Sun took his wife to the copper kettle which stood at the door. It contained a shining liquid. He pushed her head into it, and when the liquid ran down over her hair and body, lines of sparkling small stars formed on her. He told her to empty the kettle. When she did so, the liquid ran to the chief's lodge, forming a path, as of gold dust. He said, "This will be your trail when you go to see your father." 49. The False Bridegroom, Grove Ventre. Kroeber, Anthropological Papers, American Museum of Natural History. There were 2 girls, sisters. The older sister said, "We will go to look for Shell Spitter." There was a man who was poor and who lived alone with his old mother. He was the loon and his mother was Badger Woman. He heard that 2 girls were looking for Shell Spitter. He went to the children of the camp and took their shells away from them. The girls arrived and asked for Shell Spitter's tent. It was shown them, and they went to it. There stood the loon. "What are you girls looking for?" he said. "We are looking for Shell Spitter." "I am he. Let us see you spit shells." He had flooded his mouth with shells and now spit them out. The 2 girls stooped and hastily picked them up, each trying to snatch them before the other. Then he took them to his tent. His tent was old and poor. His mother was gray-headed. He said to them, "I have another tent. It is FNE and large. I have brought you here because there is more room to sleep." The girls went inside. Soon someone called to the loon, "Come over. They are making the sun dance." "Oh," he said, "now I have to sit in the middle again and give away presents. I am tired of it. For once they ought to get someone else. I am to sit on the chief's bed in the middle of the lodge." He told his mother, "Do not let these women go out." Then he went out, and the old woman guarded the door. When she was asleep, one of the girls said, "I will go out to look." She stepped over the old woman and went to the dance lodge. Looking in, she saw the people dancing on the loon's rump. On the bed in the middle sat a FNE man. Whenever he spit shells. The ground all around him was covered with them. Then the girl went back and called to her sister, "Come out. They are dancing on this man, but the one who spits shells sits in the middle of the lodge. Then they both went to the lodge. They went inside and sat down behind Shell Spitter. Then the man on the ground, on whom the people were dancing, saw them. He jumped up, he killed Shell Spitter, and ran out. He said to his mother, "I told you to watch and not to let those women out." Then he told her, "Dig a hole quickly." She quickly dug a hole inside the tent. He entered it, and then she followed him. The people came, but could do nothing. When they stopped trying to shoot, Badger Woman came out of the hole, singing in ridicule of Shell Spitter's death. Before the people could reach her, she dropped into the hole again. She did this repeatedly,